Hey everyone, welcome to another series. This one we are going to be playing Middle-Aged Ulm. It is a human nation with very heavy armor. It has very good crossbows, in fact some of the best crossbows in the game, kind of, in terms of being able to pierce armor. Everything, almost, is heavily armored. They have some very good mages in that they have priestsmiths, and they have mastersmiths, which are pretty good, but they don't have much versatility or diversity. They're pretty much an earth mage nation with a bit of access to fire, and then a very rare chance of getting air and astral. So that's one of the major weaknesses for the nation, but they're very good at what they have, which is the earth and fire, and then they also have iron blizzards, which is pretty damn good. But they can only do it really on their cap-only mages, so there's that. And then they're not affected by drain scales, but we'll talk about that, but that's a pretty big buff. Their priests kind of suck, but they actually have a kind of niche role, which we'll talk about. And they can build awesome forts. They can build the top-level forts, which are going to give you 2 bonus commander points to get you up to 3, so you can do a mage and a half a turn. But yeah, basically it's a really strong human nation, in that the troops have really good gear, they have very good vanilla stuff, but they're very limited in terms of what you as a player can kind of do with them right off the bat, because they don't have much magic access, and they don't have any sacred, so you can't like put a bless on them or something fancy. In fact, like the priests and the priestsmith are the only ones who get any kind of bless. Like there's no sacred units at all. So yeah, that's kind of what we're dealing with. They also get a production bonus in castles. But yeah, so let's go through and talk about each of the units in the roster. I've got a little test game here, but I think we'll start with the units and we'll go to the commanders. We have the War Dog. The much overlooked War Dog. So this guy is good filler. They don't hit too hard, but they don't cost much money, and they actually have pretty good protection. It's only for their body though, so they don't have any head protection. They're undisciplined, which makes them really tough to script. But sometimes when you're fighting lightly armored troops and you just need a few more bodies, these are really good to flesh out your army, like fighting barbarians. We have the Arbalist, or the crossbowman, that carries an Arbalist, and this is a kind of interesting weapon. It attacks 1 every 3 rounds, so it's very, very slow to fire. It does a crap ton of damage, though, 15. And because it's piercing, it's going to subtract 20% from the armor, and it's armor piercing, so it's going to subtract... it's going to cut the armor in half. I don't know exactly how those stack, but they stack pretty well. Basically, you're going to be doing significant damage to enemy troops, even if they're well armored. Unfortunately, though, that can also be your troops if you miss. But let's look at some other stuff. They've got a short sword, which is not bad, and they've got 17 protection and 10 attack and defense, and they're 10 gold. So this is a pretty ridiculous unit. I mean, they solidly qualify as heavy infantry, but they also have a really good crossbow. So they're pretty damn good. I probably don't make them enough, and part of it is because of the sapper, but we'll talk about them later. Now we have the infantry of Ulm. The infantry of Ulm is... okay, we'll just talk about all these, because these are 2 kind of unique units, and then we have a bunch which are kind of the same. So you have a ton, all of your troops are heavy infantry. Your quote-unquote light troops, they have 19 protection. Like, these are your light dudes, right? And that's because you can see a tiny bit of their face and you can see a little bit of their hands. And that's the little chinks in their armor that you can still stuff a sword down. They're heavy dudes, no hands, no face, 23 protection. So basically, your variety of troops are really reduced to a few different options. One is heavy or light armor, and by light it's still pretty heavy. So heavy or super heavy armor, Next is your choice of weapons. You have a two-handed battle axe, which does a ton of slashing damage. You have a flail, which is going to do a reasonable amount of blunt damage, but because it's a flail, it gets an attack bonus for shields and 2 attacks. So, better versus lightly armored troops. A maul, which is a huge amount of blunt damage. And blunt damage is better if you're fighting kind of elite troops that do not have much head protection, because basically any hit on a head is going to trigger the damage that... Basically, the damage on a head is going to be significantly increased for blunt damage. And then if you get hit on the head, especially by this much blunt damage, usually your head's gonna pop. If you do like half your HP damage, which is probably gonna happen if you get hit on the head with a maul, you just die. So anyway, worth thinking about if you're fighting dudes without hats. And then we have, for the final weapon, we have dudes with shields. I mean, not shields, with pikes. And these guys get a decent repel check, but the way repel works is it's going to compare your attack to their defense, and they have to do a morale check. Thing is, these guys don't really have high enough attack that repel is going to be super significant. But this will block some incoming damage. Yeah. Yeah, in some ways these may be your better... Like, if you just want to minimize frontline damage taken, versus a lot of troops, these might be some of your best. But the repel's not going to matter too much, but it will matter some. So those are the main weapon types. We'll cover these units here at the end later, but for all of these infantry, these are the types. Now, there's two-handed weapons, this battle axe and the pike. So those units do not have shield options. Exactly. The battle axe gets a slightly smaller hammer option. Well, okay, the mauls... Actually, all these are two-handed. Okay, so forget what I just said. But basically, some of them have... Or there's a couple one-handed varieties that also have shields. You have a hammer, which you can think of as like a lighter version of the maul. And then you have the flail. I mean, the Morning Star, which is like a lighter version of the flail. Except it only attacks once. So these are the different infantry varieties. Now, let's talk about which ones you might want to use in which circumstance. These guys are probably your best all around once you have a lot of resources. And we'll talk about when you end up getting a lot of resources later. But they have 2 hits, they do 16 damage. You have a ton of Earth Mages, you can do Strength of Giants on them. With Strength of Giants, it's very difficult to compare them to other damage types, because they're going to be hitting twice for 20 damage. Which is a ton. It's a huge amount. So, after these guys, you do have some other things to consider. The slashing is okay. I think you get for slashing, you're going to get a 20% bonus to your damage after the damage has gone through the armor. So if you're fighting very, very heavy armored dudes, these guys are probably going to outperform these guys. Like if you have dudes with 20 protection you're fighting, these are probably going to be your man. Because you can think of the first 20 damage getting subtracted, so these guys will do 2. These guys will do effectively nothing. But with Strength of Giants, these guys would do more. They would do 6, and these guys would do, basically just a DRN roll. So, and that's not exactly how it works. I mean, the DRN is going to factor in differently, but basically, if you're fighting super heavily armored dudes, the Battle Axe is good. The Maul, again, good if you don't have head protection. These guys, the guys with the shields, you really only want to use them if you're fighting crossbows. Even archers, normal archers are not really gonna hurt these guys. Like the heavily armored dudes, they don't really care that much about archers. If it's only archers you're fighting, then yeah, you might want to invest in a shield. but for the most part, these guys are immune to short bows. But versus crossbows, you do want to have black plate in, like the shield version. And that also comes with if you're going to be mounting huge numbers of crossbows. Sorry, my dog was barking outside. So yeah, if you're fighting crossbows or you're using huge swarms of your own crossbows, you'll find these arbalists are very capable of inflicting friendly fire. So if you're using like 100 of these guys and you need a solid front line, you probably want to use your shielded dudes. The problem with the shields in melee is that in order for the shield to trigger, you basically need your defense to proc, and basically you have really low defense. So the chance of the shield coming into effect in melee isn't that often, especially once these guys get a little harass penalty. So I think for just melee, these guys are pretty inferior to the other dudes. Usually what you want to do is kill the other melee line more quickly, rather than sit there with a more ineffectual weapon and let them hammer on you, because eventually they'll do some damage. So anyway, these are the troops, the basic infantry. The next is the Black Knight, and what you'll notice... Okay, let's just talk ratios real quick. 10 gold to 38 resources for the heavy infantry. For the not quite as heavy infantry, it's 10 gold to 27 resources. So you can see it's between like 1 to 3 and 1 to 4 for the gold to resource ratio. For the Black Knights, you can see it's much closer. It's 45 gold, 68 resources. So these guys are significantly more gold expensive, but they combine a bunch of things that are going to make them much better. So they've got a fair amount of damage. They're doing 2 attacks for 19. I'm sorry, an attack for 19 and an attack for 13. So a fair amount of damage. Morningstar is a pretty solid weapon. They also have a lance for that initial hit. And yeah, so that's all good. They also have the 23 protection and a kite shield. So unlike your other infantry, these guys actually have decent defense. 13 defense is enough to proc a fair amount. So their shield's going to do a much better job, and it will also help protect them from archer fire, which is nice. And it kind of, in some ways, fixes the issue. Like, you would like to get shields, but the issue with getting these shields is your dudes are significantly less killy. But these guys are pretty killy. The other issue with shields is they add to your encumbrance, which you can see is 8. On these guys it's 6, which is a ton, and then on your quote-unquote light versions it's 5. So, the horsies, though, they only have 4, which is pretty sweet. So they don't get fatigued out as quickly, which means that their protection is going to last longer, because once you get high fatigue, you'll start getting critical hits and such. So, in summary, these guys actually make really awesome expanders and raiders. Yeah, they are pretty sweet. They're really good. And that's basically the Black Knights. These are what I would recommend for initial expansion. They're very, very flexible. Your infantry kind of can get picked apart by crossbows. These guys much less so. They're good versus almost all the indie types except barbarians. And elephants. Okay, sappers. These guys are kind of interesting. They've got a pickaxe, which hits for a boatload of damage. Their stats are okay. They've got 10 attack, though this pickaxe has a -2. And their defense kind of sucks. So they're not as great in melee as the crossbowmen. But they have pretty damn good armor at 17. And then their crossbow attacks 1 every 2 rounds, which a lot of times is better than the arbalist attacking 1 out of every 3 rounds. Now this does 11 damage versus the arbalist's 15, so you can see the arbalist does a lot more damage. But if you're doing things like flaming arrows, sometimes you just want more arrows in the air. In addition, they get a siege bonus of 5, which is pretty sweet, because that's one of the things you may have trouble with a human nation with high resource units, is it's hard to get enough troops to effectively siege down something. Like these guys, 40 resources, but their siege strength is just 1.2, right? Like, they're basically as good as a skeleton at sieging something down. These guys are, 6.2, so that's a lot. So, to put it in context, if you have, let's say 20 of them, then you're going to have about 120 siege strength, which is pretty sick. That's enough to like one-hit a palisade with just 20 of these guys. So mixing these in with your armies, you'll get a nice little boost in firepower, and it's going to help you rapidly break forts down. The other kind of nice thing about a crossbow is this isn't really beefy enough to easily get through your heavy infantry's armor. So the occasional friendly fire is not going to murder your own stuff, whereas the occasional friendly fire from Arbalists is going to just mow through your heavy armored dudes. So anyway, food for thought. Yeah, these guys. But it's definitely a call. If you're fighting a lot of heavily armored dudes, and especially if you have good access to air magic, which is something Ulm can kind of do in the mid-game, probably not early mid-game, and you can throw up Arrowfend, having a stack of about 100 crossbowmen would be pretty terrifying. I mean, there's very few things that are going to survive wave after wave of Arbalist fire. But it's going to matter a lot who you're fighting, etc. Anyway, so that's the Sapper. These are super useful for being able to rapidly break forts down. And one of the things I think you learn the more you play this game is the ability to rapidly break forts down is very, very important. You can start exploiting tons of things on the strategic level of the map, like where armies are and things like that, so that you can trick people into going in the wrong provinces and then take their forts and all that. So, sappers are super important. Guardians, these are cap only. I don't know if it... yeah, they're cap only. They have a castle defense bonus, which is nice. So, they are pretty good at defending castles. If you have 100 of them in your castle, it's going to be really hard for them to take it, because basically it's going to counteract the first 170 dudes they put on top. And then as Ulm, you have pretty good castles. The thing is, they're much better in combat, so I would say if you're using them to hold up castle walls, most of the time not a great use. But anyway, it's worth pointing out. In terms of stats, they have slightly more hit points than your other dudes. They have the great 23 protection. Their encumbrance is kind of crap, like your normal super heavy infantry. It's 6. Attack skill's a little better, and then they have the Black Halberd, which has pretty... Basically, their attack's going to be a good bit better than a lot of your other weapons. Like, this is 11. You can see this is 11, though it'll be 13 versus shields. But these guys, basically, it's a 13 damage attack. A 13 attack. It is link 3, so they'll get some repel checks. And it's doing magic damage, which is pretty important. This is your only real source of magic damage on any of your units, and you can't get it through a bless very easily. In addition, it's going to, if they swing it, it doesn't even need to hit or do damage. That's how you read this. Sometimes it will say extra effect on damage or extra effect on hit. This is just extra effect, which means every single time they swing it, you're going to have an AoE 1 15 fatigue damage done to any sacred unit in that tile. What that means in effect is if you have 3 of these guys in a tile, they will usually within 2 turns fatigue out any sacred you put in front of them. So these guys are very, very good at stopping sacred rushes, and in the early game you might not have many other tools to deal with them effectively. So not only will they kill almost anything they're fighting with such high weapon damage, like 27 is really high, so they can kill kind of almost anything, and then if it's really hard for them to kill, they're going to put it to sleep in not too long. And then somebody has to chew through this huge amount of protection and then reasonable hit points in order to kind of get to them before they get to them. So, very solid unit. Very good to mix in with your other units. If you're fighting super elites, I like to mix them in with the flails, because these guys with their 2 attacks will get a fair amount of the harass penalty on the other dude, and then these guys will smack them with their Black Halberd. So these are your base units. Now we're going to talk about commanders. We have a spy. Spies can do interesting things. They can reveal score graphs. They can show magic sites. They are expensive and they take 2 commander points, though. So that is kind of a significant trade-off. But they're also Stealthy 60, which is better than Stealthy 40. You can also forge, and we'll be doing it later, but you can also forge the Earth Cat's Eye Amulet or whatever it's called, but it's only going to cost you 1 gem if you use a hammer and a Mastersmith. And that will kick their stealth up to 80, which is pretty respectable. And it's worth doing a lot of times if you have these rather high investment spies in terms of fort turns. For commanders, we have a bunch of different varieties. They basically are going to cost 70 gold and give 80 leadership, which is enough to put your troops in good formations. Yeah, this guy has 12 defense. This guy has 11. So if you're going to get one of these, I would recommend the hammer variety instead of the flail variety, because usually these guys, you just don't want them to die. And if you have the resources, you can splurge on giving them really nice armor, so they're less likely to die. Yeah. But you really don't want these guys in melee. They're just there to lead your troops. Then we have the Black Lord, who's very respectable. In some ways, this is your only guy who can kind of thug. He can't really thug right off the bat. He needs a fluffer. But if you can fluff him, he's definitely capable of thugging. With the high base protection, you can throw on Bracers of Protection, and his protection's going to jump up, to 26? Or, I'm sorry, if you do 2, it will be all the way up to 29. And then if you cast Legions of Steel on him, he's going to have very, very high protection, high 30s. But you'll still have chip damage go through there, so usually you need some source of regeneration on him. So you could do like 1 Bracer of Protection or Ring of Regen, and he becomes very thuggable. But that's a kind of high investment, and it's not a super great chassis. Like, it will still die to mages and something like that. So, anyway. But these guys are pretty good. They're also very useful in early expansion, whereas you will probably want them to lead your Black Knight parties. And they have good leadership. So, yeah, they're pretty damn good. Next, we have the Mastersmith. Now, this is kind of the unit that makes Middle-Aged Ulm. On first look, it may not seem that awesome. It's a Fire 1 Earth 2. It has a 20% chance, so you'll be getting a fair number of these, to get a Fire, Air, Earth, or Astral random. Each one of these have their uses, and we'll talk about them. But perhaps most importantly, they are mundane researchers, so this allows you to take free drain scales. They give a resource bonus, so they are going to add resources to whatever province they're in. Pretty sweet. And they have a forge bonus of 2. Which means with the hammer, they can forge 5 gem items for 1 gem. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's so strong that if you ever want to make a 5 gem item, like if Illwinter ever wants to make a 5 gem item, they have to say, okay, can Master Smiths make it, and will that break the game? And there's some things that are, like, borderline. So we'll talk about them. But first, let's talk about each of the randoms. So the Fire random can do a lot of your fire stuff. They can do summon fire elementals in a pinch. They can do flaming arrows with a fire in a jar and a couple fire gems and Phoenix power. They are going to be your fire access. They can also do augury to site search for fire. So that's what you use your fire ones for. Your air ones, you're going to need them to site search air, because that's the only way to get air income at the beginning of the game. They are going to be able to forge a lot of your important items. So the things you can do at the beginning of the game are forging alquils. In the middle of the game, you can do bows of war. And, I mean, there's a fair number of 5 gem earth air items that are pretty useful, but those are kind of the 2 most important ones. Next, for Earth, the Earth randoms are going to be Earth 3, so with Earth Power they go up to Earth 4. With Earth Boots on, which are pretty cheap for you, they only cost you 6 Earth Gems, they go up to Earth 5, which is pretty ridiculous. So, yeah. 5, like an Earth 5 guy is going to be the dude you're going to do all of your big army buffs with in the later game. You'll be doing Earthquake, or Army of Gold, or Weapons of Sharpness. That's what this guy is going to be doing. And then Astral, these guys can enter communions. They can forge crystal gear, because Earth Astral is one of the best cross paths in the game. They don't have a ton. They can do Shrouds of the Battle, same for 1 Astral Pearl. Aside from that, they don't have a ton of uses, but yeah. I'm trying to think what else. That's about it for the Master Smith. These guys are good. You're going to be making these guys in all of your forts that you can. Almost every turn you can make them. Next we have the Acolyte, the Unassuming Acolyte. Very cheap. Basically, it's a cheap version of an indie priest, and that's about all you can say about them. The only thing you can say in addition to that is they are your only Recruit Anywhere Sacred. You have a couple other Sacreds that come out of your capital, but these are your only Recruit Everywhere Sacred. And what that means is that if you want to do any shenanigans with your Bless, like, let's say you put a Bow of War on this guy, you have him Bless, and you have one of the silly weapon blesses on your Pretender God, this guy can shoot out that Bow of War with all those blesses on it. There's a few other things you can do, like put Fire Bolas on this guy, and then he will fling them forward, carrying whatever bless effect you have. And he can also have the strength items, which you can forge usually for about 1 Earth Gem, which are going to make his strength go up for all of the ranged attacks. So anyway, this guy actually can become very, very strong with Middle-Aged Ulm, so not to be overlooked. Then we have the Master Mason. He is pretty sweet. He's got a siege bonus of 30, which is a lot. So you can put him in a rather unassuming army. 1 recruitment point. So if you think about it this way, you can spend 180 gold in your capital and get 90 siege strength. That's pretty cheap and pretty fast. So if you were going on it for an enemy cap rush strategy, you could easily do 2 turns of production on this. And then with that, you would have 180 siege strength on top of your normal force, so you could probably like 2 or 3 turn crack a fort. Or probably 2 turn crack almost any fort. So anyway, kind of cool. These guys are also a Mason, so they can upgrade all of your Citadel, or all of your level 3 forts into your Citadels. So that is pretty useful. And yeah, and then we have now we're on to the cap-only stuff. You get Black Priests, who are pretty cool. They are Inquisitors, so if you take low Dominion, which I think you should as MA-Ulm, you're going to have some issues fighting enemy Dominion from coming into your lands. And if you want good scales, which you should also want, then you really don't want enemy Dominion in your lands, and this is one of your best tools to deal with it. So he can do Iron Blizzard in a pinch, but mainly what he's useful for is getting rid of enemy Dominion and preaching up your own Dominion. I think he also... No, he doesn't. Okay. Then we have the Priest Smith. This is a lot like the Master Smith. You'll see same paths. He doesn't have the random. Instead, he has 1 level of Holy, and he's Sacred. So this guy will take any bonuses from your Bless, which is kind of cool. And then he only has a Forge bonus of 1 instead of 2. So one of the things I think I screw up a few times in this game, and I haven't finished the game, but I'm a little bit into it when I've come back and recorded this, is I have this guy forge things by accident. You do not want these guys forging things. You want your Master Smiths to forge things. This guy will waste, if you put a hammer on him, it's going to cost twice as many gems to use this guy to forge as your Master Smith. So it's a big deal. Now, importantly, these guys can cast Iron Darts and Iron Blizzards, which are national-only spells, which require Earth and Holy. And that's primarily what you want to use these guys for. They're also lower upkeep than your Master Smiths, though they cost more in gold to recruit. So they're a better long-term investment. But usually, once you have a few of the kind of... We'll talk about it in the actual game, but once you have a few of the Master Smiths that you really need in the at the beginning of the game, you're going to switch over to Priest-Smith production and only stop every once in a while to make a few Black Priests. So, yeah, these guys are really good. The Lord Guardian, pretty cool. He has Halt Heretic, which I do not believe these guys have. Yeah, they do not. But it's basically a better version of your Guardians. Very good armor, very good protection, high strength, a bit more HP. The Halt Heretic is basically an all aura for Sacreds only, so it can make this guy pretty effective against Sacreds. I don't really think he's super thuggable, though. I mean, you can do it, right? You could do the same thing you can do with the Black Lord, and put bracers of protection on them. He has a decent two-handed weapon, so maybe you don't want to change that. I don't know. I mean, you could probably thug with him. I think you're probably better off with the Black Lord. The only difference is you get foot boots here, and you don't with the Black Lord. And you can argue you have a better weapon here. So, I don't know. I might try doing it at some point. The real problem with this guy is he's maybe as good a thug as the Black Lord. There's a lot of advantages to being mounted, like lower encumbrance. But this guy's cap only, so he's going to compete with your cap only mages for production. So, yeah, probably not going to make those. So those are the normal units. There's a few spells we're going to talk about too. One of them is Conjuration 8, Summon Iron Angel. It is 25 Earth Gems. And yeah, these guys are pretty sick. They've got Halt Heretic 9, which is a very, very high aura, all aura. So it's very difficult for Sacreds to attack these guys. They come with built-in fire and heat resistance. They're flying. They have reinvigoration to make up for a lot of their encumbrance. They're ambidextrous, so they don't get as much of an attack skill penalty. They come with Sword of Sharpness, which is a decent weapon. And they come with Divine Grasp, which is basically a lot like your Guardian's weapons. It does 2 times damage versus Magic Beans, though, which is different. So, yeah, I mean, you don't even really need to upgrade these. These are pretty damn good abilities. Very good base armor. So these are very kind of budget thugs. Like, one way to look at it is you don't need to upgrade this, you don't need to upgrade that, you don't need to upgrade the hat or the armor. They have boots, so they are kind of fatigue neutral, because you get 1 built-in reinvigoration kind of hidden per turn on every unit. So I think these guys are fatigue neutral. And if not, they're barely not fatigue neutral. They have one thing you can't see here is they're -10 to all magic paths, so you cannot empower these guys, which I think is fair because it's a pretty damn strong chassis. So the things when you are going to kit these guys out, basically you can put a boot on them, and there's a few different boots. Like you could do the key boots for 1 air gem, and it's going to give you an extra kick, or you could do the boots of strength, or you could do the trample boots. All those things are going to be 1 gem. And then for this, you could do the reinvigoration, or the giant girdle of giant strength, or whatever it's called, which is going to give you a bit of strength and some reinvigoration, or you could just do the traditional 2 bracers, which is going to bring their defense up very high and their protection up very, very high. But yeah, these guys are sick. Especially if you can fluff them. If you've got an Astro Mage to cast Body Ethereal on them, and then somebody else to do Legions of Steel, it's just going to be ridiculous. They're going to do a ton of damage. The thing you probably would want to put on them most is a Ring of Regeneration. But that's if you have the Nature Gems to spare. But yeah, anyway, very, very good unit. They're not... I wouldn't put these guys at super combatant level. I think they're at very, very heavy thug level. Like, they are not going to be able to wade into an army of elite troops and kill them all. Especially if they're mage supported, which is kind of what a super combatant can do. But these guys are great heavy army support. Like, they're strong enough where they can kind of jump into the back line with their flying and start trying to kill enemy mages. Especially if they get buffed up and they have some regen. And they're definitely strong enough to take out PD. So, anyway, that's how you can use them. We have a few other things to talk about. One is we get Sloth of Bears. I think it's... I can't remember. I think it's Conjuration 5. But you spend 10 nature gems and you get 10 of these guys. And they are pretty solid. They're not sacred or anything, but they have a boatload of HP. They hit for a fair amount of damage. They have okay natural protection. And then okay stats and really high strength. And the strength is really important because for 10 nature gems, you're getting 36 siege strength, which is not bad. It's not bad at all. So if you need these guys to kind of bulk out your army, there are definitely worse ways to do it. They're not going to be your most damaging dude, but they're not bad. So it is worth considering. The problem is you're not really going to have a lot of nature gems as Ulm. And you're probably going to want to use your nature gems for other things than just getting kind of chaff, but it's an option if somehow you walk into a ton of nature gems. We have a few more spells to talk about. So one of them is Iron Darts. This is Evocation 3, and it's going to do 3 plus Iron Darts. So if you have your cap-only mages... once they do summon Earth Power, they're going to be up to Earth 5. I mean, Earth 4. I can't even talk. They're going to be up to Earth 3 after summon Earth Power. But for your Iron Darts, you are going to be at 5 darts per cast for these guys, because they're going to get 3 plus the number of Earth Paths you have over 1, which in their case, since they're Earth 3, will be 2. So you'll get 5 Iron Darts. That's why I was saying 5. But anyway, so 5 Iron Darts. They each do 13 damage. But it's armor-piercing damage, so it's like a crossbow. And it's 40 range and 2 times damage against magic beings. So pretty good against relay and things like that. And then Iron Blizzard, which is an Evocation 6 spell. And it's a little bit shorter range 30, but it's 30 plus effects. And you get 5 for every additional level the caster is. So it's also Earth 1. So your Priest Smiths, once they get up to Earth 3 from Summon Earth Power, they're going to be spitting out 40 of these per cast. They do less damage than the darts. It's only 10 versus 13. So that part's not quite as good. But it's 40 projectiles, which is a ton. Now, the fatigue cost also is going to get dropped a lot, because your Earth 3 casting an Earth 1 spell, you're going to divide this by 3. So your fatigue cost is going to be, like, what is it? 13, 14, something like that. Plus your encumbrance. So pretty damn good. Pretty damn good. Yeah, and then you're also going to have reinvigoration going on from Earth Power, so you're going to be able to spam this out pretty well. This is way better than Blade Winds in almost all circumstances. And then if there's magic beings that they've, things they've summoned, it's just going to destroy those. So very good spell, very strong in the mid game. These are blocked later by things like arrow-fended stuff, so once those come online, not as important. The final spell you have as Ulm is you have Tempering the Will. This spell is actually kind of a blessing and a curse. It's a bit like Protection of the Sepulchre, which the Undead nations get, where it's a battlefield-wide magic resistance negates MR buff. So it's going to increase the magic resistance of units, everybody on the battlefield, but it's going to be negated by MR. The problem with this is AI loves casting it. And you cast it once, great, some of your troops have their MR increased. Well, okay, now there's still 30 troops left that don't have it. And the AI is like, okay, let's cast it again and get them. And now you have 20 of your troops that don't have it. And the AI is like, great, let's cast it again. So you have to be really careful about running down Thaumaturgy, because picking this up, it's Thaumaturgy 5, I think. Picking this up by accident can actually be pretty bad, because it's going to potentially have your mages casting it instead of other better evocations. So, such is life. But it could be useful. I think it's bad enough, though, that you really don't want to get Thaumaturgy until in your big armies you can reliably put up anti-magic. Yeah. It would be nice if the AI didn't cast it. That's when it would be nice. Like, if this spell were just uncastable by the AI, then this would be nice, because you can say, okay, well, I don't have any Astral Mages, but I want to get my MR up for whatever reason. It's pretty easy to research. I'm going to drop it a few times, and then we'll be good. But that's not how it is. The AI casts it, you have much better stuff for them to be casting. So that's actually kind of a negative, but worth talking about. So anyway, that's it for the national overview. Next episode will be Pretenders, so we'll see you then.